So you're 17 years old. Obviously, you see what's going on in the world. What was going through your mind? Did you think you'd be in Vietnam?
Not at all. 17 years old is an age where you really don't know. Back then, you didn't know what was really going on. I didn't even know what Vietnam was about, to tell you the truth.
You walk in and you decided to enlist. Talk about that conversation with the recruiter when you said, I'd like to join the military.
Well, I walked in and I said, I'd like to join the Army and I want to go to Vietnam. Well, the recruiter actually was speechless because nobody says that. But at the time, all of the nurses who were there had volunteered to go. And so that's really where I wanted to be, you know, to take care of the guys that were giving their all.
That portion of our program, Vietnam Reflections Memorial Day special that we aired last night. And what I want to do is introduce you to a couple folks who really put the lion's share of the effort into this and put it together. Danny Kushel, Vice President RNN, and John Houseman, an executive producer at FiOS One News, and a little bit of a genesis of it. And, you know, so I'm proud that we've done here over the years is, you know, never confuse the warrior with the war. We were fortunate enough to go back to Normandy for the 55th anniversary of D-Day, where we took vets from our region that served there and took them back. And they were celebrated, and I think, in their own words, it gave them a final chapter of their lives that they were able to celebrate and be recognized, rightfully so, even more. We thought about doing the same thing with Vietnam, given the challenges that these vets in particular face coming back. But, and Danny, you researched this, it's not like you go to Normandy on the bluffs of Omaha and Utah Beach where there's a cemetery and Americans go there and they're treated like royalty coming back. In Vietnam, there's no celebratory, you know, landmarks for that war. It didn't end the way that we thought it would.
You know, we started this a year ago. It was last June, when the idea came that, hey, let's go back to Hue, because this year, 2018, the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Hue and the start of the Tet Offensive. And we thought, okay.
Which is a huge turning point in the war, absolutely.
So just like, unless we forget, let's bring a bunch of guys back. And we started talking to vets, and we talked to vets from all different types. We talked to the flag officers, people who went on to have great military careers, the grunts in the field. We ended up talking to doctors and nurses. And, oh, they had great stories. Pretty much universally, while they thought it was a great project, nobody wanted to go back. Not nobody, but really the vast majority didn't really want to go back. They had left it behind, they'd moved on, and it was time to look at something else.
And you spoke to a lot of these folks, John, in the pre-interview process. There was still a lot of raw emotion attached to this war.
Yeah, and even though 50 years have passed since 1968, like we're talking about, there's still, for decades, they kept stuff bottled up inside. So the idea of going back, even if they've dealt with it now over the past 10 or 15 years, the idea of going back was still very raw and painful to think about. Although we did have the one, Ed Frank, who goes back every 18 months or so. And that's a real interesting story about why he wants to go back and why he went originally and why he keeps going back.
That was an evolving position, because when he came back, like so many, he closed that door. And it's as we show in the special. So what we decided to do is, I'm sure wherever you're watching us from, and the distribution's wide here, so it's not just obviously in New York, and New Jersey, and Connecticut, and Pennsylvania, wherever you're watching, we decided to pick on one community, and it could have been any community that had vets in there, some of which that knew each other, but all had very different functions when they were in Vietnam. And we talked about their life experiences. So I wanted to play a couple clips for you now. Here's one about a veteran remembering his service there.
I decided that I wasn't going to be drafted. I was going to have my own choice. So I had my draft notice, but I walked down to the recruiting office, and the first desk was the Marines. And I never got beyond the first desk. So I enlisted. And I thought I chose a profession that was safe. I was going to be a technician, okay? And then I ended up flying helicopters in Vietnam.
When you decided that you were going to enlist, what was the reaction of family and friends?
Hold on. My mother was devastated. My father had died. I was the oldest of 2 sons. I broke her heart. I still remember, I get a little emotional because I remember my mom. She dropped me off at the recruiting office the day I went to Parris Island. It was a tough day, one of the toughest days of my life. Quite frankly, if it wasn't for the draft, I probably never would have joined. I really had never considered it, but the reality was there. I had I really didn't have much choice.
You know, John, that's what was instructive, and I think for those who didn't live through it, myself included, you thought, oh, everyone was drafted. A lot of the folks that we spoke to, with the exception of one, with the nurse, they knew they were coming up, and they tried to put themselves in the best circumstance, and it didn't always turn out that way, but it was interesting how they all, as a young person, 17, 18, whatever, had to make a calculation as to where they wanted to go, they were going, and what they wanted to do.
Right. One guy joined the Navy under the assumption he would end up on a ship kind of away from the combat for the most part, and he ended up working on those Tango boats going right up into the war zone. The other guy, as he mentioned, he thought he'd be a technician. Now he's flying rescue missions and, supply missions, and got shot down twice. They didn't get what they were expecting, it didn't work out quite that way.
The other thing, Danny, that struck me was how, almost without exception, when they came back, after seeing things, all of them said that they would like to but could never forget. And we didn't delve too much into that. It's where it was up to them to share what they wanted to share. We wanted to really make the program about honoring their service. A couple of them gave pretty details that literally, one in the airport took off the fatigues, threw them in the trash can, and never looked back. And the other ones changed so that they wouldn't be harassed by Americans when they came home. It's not, even with all the controversy around the Iraq War, etc., it's not, thankfully, the reception that the guys deservedly get right now, where they're thanked for their service. It wasn't like that from these guys' firsthand accounts.
It was a different time. I mean, when they landed, there weren't. I mean, right now we see, once a week we get the parents who come home, and it's a surprise, and everyone cheers and ballpark, which is great and phenomenal and the way it should be. But in 1968, it wasn't like that. The protests were in full swing at that point. The Vietnam War was extremely unpopular, and one thing that it's related to this, which most people said, especially at the very beginning, they said, and one thing that not surprised me, but the amount of patriotism from the people who went, whether they volunteered, which were the vast majority of the people we spoke to, were volunteered, they wanted it to be known, almost to a person, that the stories that people were protesting, the baby killers, the atrocities that the small percentage of the soldiers got involved in, that wasn't most of these guys. They went because they thought they were doing something right in the world. And that sense of patriotism, there's one, Edie, the nurse at one point said, Americans are good people. Americans will help. I mean, that's not somebody who's just bitter. That's somebody who I think, still keeps this country where I think we.
And there was, to Danny's point, John, a spoken or unspoken among these guys, the Ken Burns documentary on Vietnam, while it was well received, the emphasis of the atrocities at the hands of the American soldiers, all he said, we don't debate that it may have happened, but to Danny's point, it was a fraction of people who participated in that, and the rest of us, did our jobs, tried to protect our guys in the in our units, and we tried to do our country proud. And what we came back to was something that our fathers never experienced, and they didn't think they'd experience either.
I think it was Charlie who made the point about the fathers and uncles who came back from World War II came back to parades. They came back to respect. Charlie came back. He went back to a job. He grew his hair long to fit in with everyone else, and he said, I never talked to anybody. I never told them I was in the war. Imagine coming back from serving your country, and your best option is to not tell anybody you were there. That's got to be a painful reality that then's going to linger for decades.
What also means now is that their stories aren't being told in the same way that other wars have. And now, I mean, one thing that I think we're all proud of is that we told their story. It wasn't our story, there was no agenda, it was just, hey, we want to ask some questions and it'll go wherever it goes. But those opportunities are dying out, literally.
And in fact, this is a little inside baseball, but it was the idea of these guys that I wasn't even on camera for that. I went to interview all these guys individually here, but it was their stories, and there's a chronology, who they were before they went, what it was like on that first night when they were in country, their service, what it was like coming home, and then what they did after. And to that point, I was impressed at what these folks have done with not only their lives, but also in this chapter of their lives where they, to a person, are giving back and even opening up some old wounds in the process. Take a look.
Right now, most of my work is done with the church. Pilgrim Baptist Church. I works there a lot, doing different things around there, feeding we have like a soup kitchen on every Friday. I help run that.
The Nam Night Motorcycle Club, we do fundraising, we do community work. We helped a guy that was thrown out of his house. We flipped the bill and put him back in his house and helped him pay his bills.
What made you decide to get involved with the Memorial for Women?
All of the feelings and everything kept bubbling up. And Diane Carlson Evans, who was my hoochmate and was my friend throughout the whole time, had asked me if I would be the representative on the East Coast. Then the dedication came down in Washington, and it was the most amazing weekend. When you talked to the women who served, it was like you had met someone from your own country. It was such a relief to know that these women were there.
Tell people about STEP.
A good friend of mine, Howard Golden, him and I got together and we decided that we wanted to go back to Vietnam. Well, a lot of us were going back because we wanted to see the country. We wanted to have some sort of closure. We saw a lot of poverty. And we decided that we wanted to do something to help the kids. We came back to our Rotary Club and we said we wanted to do an international project. That's the Rose School. It's located in Dalat. We raised almost $100,000 so that we could start that school. It housed 545 children.
Tell people about the Marine Corps League.
Probably our biggest thing is our Toys for Tots. We gather and donate 13,000 toys a year to needy kids within Rockland County. But now I do some peer-to-peer work, mentoring with either a couple of Vietnam veterans and an Iraqi veteran.
And John, Ed Frank's story, the guy who we just showed there, just a snippet, and there's so much more with what he did with the Rose School and beyond that. He's changed not only lives, he's changed entire communities in Vietnam with the help of the guys from the Rotary Club. And he would tell stories. People did not want to go back. And they agreed they would go to, every guy that went back, they'd go back to where they served around the country. And for some, they would have to exorcise some of the demons that haunted them for decades. And they all felt better having gone through it. And then they decided kids they'd never met before in a community that was just a dot on the map from when they were there, they would go back and they've transformed it.
And I think part of it, the reason they keep going back also is the reception that they got from the Vietnamese people. They talked about sitting down in a bar situation and actually toasting each other and talking about how it's so much better to be toasting than to be shooting at each other. They said everywhere they went in Vietnam, they were welcomed warmly. And these are military people being welcomed warmly. And I think that's why they want to help the school children, of course, but there's also that sense of going back, you get closure, and you can take it then to the next level, even beyond that.
And I thought it interesting, Danny, it's from a much longer conversation, but to a person, they all thought that where we've come as a country in terms of the professional military, where everybody used to know somebody in the block that was involved or whatever, and sometimes more than that, and where now people can go an entire war without knowing a family who has a loved one overseas. That's not a good thing for this country, even with all the problems that was associated with the draft and everything else. I thought that was interesting.
There was a very telling line at some point in the special. If you want to stop a war, start a draft, because everyone then has some skin in the game. And I think that sense came through from a lot of people, not just the 5 people that you saw.
Nobody glamorized what they saw over there. I think they were all proud of the service. Anyway, I just wanted to make a point to you two guys who did the lion's share of this. I get to be the talking head, but between all the coordination and making it happen, and also with DC as well, when we went down for the Vietnam Memorial, you did a phenomenal job. And John, how you put it all together and really humanized the people. I really thought
I think it was an honor for us to
yeah.
to talk with them.
Me as well. So thank you, I know, from all of us to not only to all the veterans who participated with us, but also a special thank you to all the Vietnam veterans who haven't gotten that as much as they've deserved. Thanks, guys. All right, when we come back, we will switch gears. We're going to head out to Long Island and we'll check in on the Mangano corruption trial. There is confusion in the courtroom. That is, the jury still can't reach a verdict. Dominic Carter, of course, he's on the scene. We'll join him live to get the latest.